Hello and welcome to my little chit-chat on British generalship in the Desert War. I hope you'll find it as priceless as I do, and by that I mean it's worth nothing. It's merely my personal opinions. I'll look at the Commander-in-Chief Middle East and 8th Army commanders from the start of the war in the desert through 2nd Alamein, November of 42. And I'm leaving Beresford Pierce out of it. Nobody remembers him. He's in charge of 13th Corps from April through September of 41, and his next posting is to the Sudan, which ought to give you a pretty good idea of how he did in the Western Desert. Okay, let's begin. Let's take a moment to review the real estate that the C&C Middle East Command was responsible for. It's much more than Egypt. Greece, Turkey, Persia, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, the Sudan, East Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula also came under the watchful eye of the C&C. And as I think most of our viewers will know, more than a few of these locations saw periods of serious fighting, usually at the worst possible time for the troops battling it out in Egypt and Libya. I'm going to rattle off a short list of events that took place under Wavell's watch as C&C Middle East. Operation Compass, the destruction of Italian forces in Egypt and Libya. The conquest of the Italian colonial empire in East Africa. The loss of Greece. Rommel's first offensive. Operations Brevity and Battle Axe. The loss of Crete. The suppression of the Iraqi revolt. Operation Exporter, the occupation of Syria and Lebanon. That's a lot. And remember, Britain and the Commonwealth were truly alone during this period of the war. At this point, Churchill said, "Wavell's tired, he has to go." And I always say, well, who wouldn't be? Given that he had weak forces that never matched the task, I think Wavell juggled his command better than anyone might reasonably expect. The unexpected success of Operation Compass secures his place in military history. Could Compass have achieved total victory against the Italians? Well, yes, if one could convince Churchill to delay the Greek adventure, and I don't think he was going to. Wavell could have fought harder to wrap up North Africa, but I'd like to suggest that what might have helped was something under Wavell's control. Early in Operation Compass, there's a brief pause in the tempo of operations as the 4th Indian Division is swapped out of the line for the 6th Australian Division, the 4th Indian being needed for operations in East Africa. O'Connor protested the move, but Wavell went ahead with the transfer. The 6th Australian would quickly prove itself to be an elite formation, but time was of the essence. I've always thought that East Africa could keep, and that leaving the 4th Indian in the line might buy as much as a week. And one more week at the end of Compass might have been all that was needed to drive the Italians out of North Africa entirely. I think Wavell earns a grade of A-. I think Auchinleck's reputation has gotten a boost from the legions of Monty haters and a couple of generous comments by Rommel. The Auk presides over Crusader, a tactical win, Gazala, a shocking operational defeat, and took personal charge to achieve a stalemate at 1st Alamein. Too often Auchinleck gets into trouble due to overconfidence and wishful thinking. He also consistently selects poor choices for 8th Army commander, and he's too slow to fire failed subordinates. Auchinleck did fight Rommel to a tie at 1st Alamein, proving him to be a much better field general than a theater commander. Both Churchill and Chief of the Imperial General Staff Alan Brooke lose confidence in Auchinleck, and he is posted to India. I believe the Auk earned a C as a theater commander. Harold Alexander is Churchill's favorite general. He looks like a general. He's utterly brave and fearless. He inspires others with boundless optimism by his mere presence. He has a gift for choosing capable subordinates, which is good because he has been promoted above his ability with a near total lack of the intellectual capital needed for theater command. Don't believe me? Read what Montgomery and Alan Brooke have to say. The latter fought long and hard to keep Alexander out of Northwest Europe for fear of the damage he might do. I'd like to read a short passage from Carlo d'Este's fatal decision, Anzio and the Battle for Rome. The story is told of Alexander building sandcastles on the beach of Dunkirk during the height of the German dive bombing, and of an excited staff officer rushing up to report to Alexander, "Our position is catastrophic," and receiving the reply, "I'm sorry, I don't understand long words." That's incredible. Alexander was really, really lucky. Teamed with Montgomery? Perfect. Teamed with Gott? Perfectly awful, and a potential war winner for the Axis powers. Still, graded on results, I must award Alexander an A, but with an asterisk. Baseball fans will know the meaning. The rest of you can look it up. Now let's look at the Army commanders. First up, Richard O'Connor. When Italy enters the war, O'Connor unleashes the Western Desert Force and raids against the Italians. He plans and executes Operation Compass. What's intended as another brief raid expands into a campaign that leads to total victory at Betapham. Recuperating from illness, O'Connor is recalled to deal with Rommel's first offensive, but he is captured. His loss to the Allied cause is keenly felt over the next 2 years. O'Connor escapes in 1943, and Montgomery recommends him to lead the 8th Army, but the job goes to Leese. O'Connor does command 8th Corps in Northwest Europe. It's a short tenure, but undeniably great. My grade is an unqualified A. Alan Cunningham defeated Italian forces in East Africa, and his success is rewarded with command of 8th Army. After some initial setbacks in Operation Crusader, Cunningham recommends that the offensive be terminated. Auchinleck disagrees and eventually relieves Cunningham. Cunningham is a good, sound man if you're fighting a 19th century colonial campaign, but not the fellow you won up against Rommel. A failure in the desert, grade F. Neil Ritchie mostly served as a staff officer until selected by Auchinleck to take command of 8th Army after Cunningham's sacking during Operation Crusader. At 44, he is the youngest general in the British Army at that moment. He leads the 8th Army to disaster in the Gazala battles, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. The fall of Tobruk stuns the British. Says Churchill, quote, "Defeat is one thing, disgrace is another," unquote. Auchinleck relieves Ritchie. Promoted higher than he should have been, he was able to obtain other commands after his dismissal, notably 12th Corps in Northwest Europe. Another failure in the desert, grade F. So if you're Churchill, how do you explain this repeated failure in British generalship to the public and to Parliament? As I see it, he had two choices. He could admit that we don't have anyone currently available who is familiar with the art of modern mechanized warfare, let alone a master of it. Let's call this option the truth, and I think you'll agree that that's a non-starter. Option 2, let's call this one the lie, involves talking up Rommel to cover up abysmal British generalship. Something like, "Our generals are fully trained for the rigors of modern war. Unfortunately, we have a very daring and skillful opponent against us, and may I say across the havoc of war, a great general." There now, doesn't that sound better? And nobody has to have their feelings hurt, and nobody has to call for a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons. After serving in a number of roles in 7th Armored Division, William Strafer Gott is appointed commander. He's extremely popular with the troops. He plans and executes Operation Brevity. He's picked by Churchill to command the 8th Army after Auchinleck is relieved. Gott had been in the desert since 1938, had no new ideas to try, and was clearly tired out. We'll never know, but I don't believe Gott would have enjoyed success. He was killed in action when his transport aircraft was shot down by German fighters. Was this a targeted assassination like the American shoot-down of Yamamoto? If so, I think the Germans made a mistake. No grade is necessary for Strafer Gott. A professional with a gift for training, organizing, and motivating. Montgomery was exactly what was needed in August 1942. Here's Churchill summing up Montgomery, quote, in defeat unbeatable, in victory unbearable, unquote. He's right. Completely lacking in diplomacy and tact, Monty is at heart a bully. Think New York Yankees manager Billy Martin, but with better personal hygiene and diet. Monty plans his battles to play to the strengths of 8th Army. Keeping Commonwealth casualties low is a top priority. He wins the defensive battle at Alam Halfa and then the offensive battle of 2nd Alamein, giving Churchill the victory he so desperately wanted. I'm amused when I see people trying to downplay Montgomery's talents because he enjoyed an abundance of men and equipment. That's preposterous. War isn't a game where a 10-7 win is an acceptable outcome. Ideally, you want to win by a lot to nothing. And I may be wrong, but I'm not sure that Commonwealth superiority at 2nd Alamein is greater than that which they enjoyed in Crusader, a close win, or Gazala, a shocking defeat. Like him or not, it's difficult to overstate Monty's contribution to Allied victory in the Desert War. Grade A. That concludes my look at British generalship in the Western Desert. Thank you for letting me share my love of the period with you. Let's let Winston have the last word.
This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.